Good afternoon, everyone. Country Flyboy here again with the Cessna 172 tutorial. We'll be covering avionics this time. I'm going to taxi us out into the ramp. Alright, we're going to be going over the avionics on the radio stack, each and every one and what they do. I covered the autopilot already during the cruise tutorial. We'll re-mention some of that stuff again here. I'm just going to taxi the aircraft out onto the ramp. And we'll just sit right here. We won't be in anyone's way here. Alright, so set the brake. Okay. So let's go over the autopilot, well, not the autopilot, the avionics panel. Let me position the camera in a good spot. There we go. Alrighty, now we got some nice detail. Avionics panel. Over here, you have your Nav GPS selector. Here you would, if you were flying the aircraft that had the GPS 400 or something similar integrated, this is where you would select what your nav mode was. This is what drives the OBS1 indication, navigation, radio, or GPS. I normally like to fly with the 295 GPS, so we'll switch that back. So when you only have the 295 or no GPS at all, then you only have navigation and radio capability. You can't drive the OBS from the GPS at all. Okay, here you got your CDI OBS indications. These are for, top one does VOR, localizer, and glide slope. So that's your ILS one. It also does your VOR one. That's controlled by the Nav 1 radio. And below that one is number 2, which is controlled by the Nav 2 radio. So this one does not have glide slope capability. Same operation principle, but just two different ones. You should use both of them. Up at the top we have the audio panel. This is a Bendix King KMA26 audio panel. You have your OMI lights right here, and not every switch on this works. You can select, you can see the green light is the one you are currently receiving. So I can receive from Comm 1 or Comm 2. And although they didn't model it, this audio panel does support Comm 3. I don't think you can have 3 Comm radios in Flight Simulator. I'm not sure. That might be a limitation. Then again, it might not. And same over here, you got your Nav Radios. You can receive from them, which means you'll be hearing their Morse code identifier. Flight Sim doesn't model high WASP transmissions, so you won't pick them up. We covered that during cruise. This knob over here is how you select which radio you're transmitting on. Again, we have Comm 1, Comm 2, and Comm 3. Comm 3 is not replicated, so it's inoperative. You also have PA, which in real life would make your transmissions heard across all the headphones in the aircraft. Versus if it's on Comm 1 or Comm 2 or Comm 3, it's just the pilot and the co-pilot that can hear each other. But PA will transmit across all of them. So, again, the lights indicate which one you're receiving. This indicates which one you're transmitting. You can only transmit on one of your 2 Comm radios, but you can receive on both of them. See, like if I tuned Comm 1 to the local CTAF frequency, and then Comm 2 to the AWAS frequency. Okay, so I'm transmitting on Comm 1 and receiving on Comm 1. I'll push this green light to receive on Comm 2, and I get the weather. But I'm still transmitting on Comm 1. And if I switch this over, now I'm transmitting and receiving on Comm 2, and now I can receive on COM 1. So you see how that works. Green light selects which one you're receiving, and the knob selects which one you're transmitting. EMG stands for emergency. I believe that will let you transmit on the emergency frequency, 121.5. Nav radios we already went over. Marker is your marker audio for ILS approaches, outer marker, inner marker, and middle marker. DME is DME audio. ADF is ADF audio. Fun thing about ADF. Fun thing to mention about AVF is there's no way to know if the ADF has failed. If it's gone inoperative sometime while you're using it, there's no indication on the gauge itself. If I look down, you can see the ADF needle. There's no way of knowing whether that gauge has failed or not, or if the ADF has stopped transmitting, the beacon itself. So when you're doing, see, like these VOR indications here, they have flags to let you know they're not receiving. So when you're doing things with ADF, you need to have ADF turned on at all times, because in real life you can vary the volume of it. So you would have it turned on at all times and just have the volume set to where you can just barely hear it. That way you could hear if the ADF failed, because if the ADF beacon itself failed, then you would no longer hear the radio transmission. Aux and Monty, I'm not 100% sure what they do, but they're inoperative in the sim anyway. Alright, now down to the two Comm Radios, two Nav comms. These are KX115A Comm Nav Radios from Big Next King. Left side is your comm, right side is nav. Let's look at the comm. You can turn the gauge itself off via the power switches, and all the gauges in A2A have their own power switch, except for the autopilot. Alright, so that will turn that on and then back off. This switch here swaps the two frequencies out. Now this little switch here lets you tune via channels as opposed to frequency. See, normally you tune via frequency, but you can also tune via channels. See? But normally you just tune by frequency, like an intelligent person. Alrighty. Nav radios, again, sort of the same thing. This one swaps the two out. Now this mode selector here does a lot of fun things. Flag, this indicates that we're not receiving a VOR antenna. I'll show you what this one means later. 2 will show a bearing to the VOR you have currently tuned. From shows the bearing from the VOR you have tuned. And estimated time is just the estimated time to the VOR. And again, back to there. And the same functionality down here. Alright, let's move on down. To the ADF. Alright, so this is the ADF here. This thing is accurately replicated in the A2A 172. Now, I did a review on this aircraft a long time ago, and I made the mistake of saying I don't know how to use ADF. Now, since I also said I'm a licensed pilot in real life and I didn't know how to use ADF, a lot of people jumped all over me. Guys, in my defense, I've never ever touched one of these in real life. Yes, I can quote the books all you want me to on ADF, but that doesn't mean I know how to work it. When I said I didn't know how to work it, what I meant was the gauge itself, not the actual principle of ADF. ADF, by and large, is for the most part pretty simple, although the books do tend to make it a lot harder than it really is. Make it sound harder than it really is. By and large, ADF is pretty simple. It's an AM radio, and this needle points at the station, so as long as you remember that, you're good to go. However, it's the modes of the gauge that I really don't know the difference between. ANT, ADF, BFO, or whatever. Okay, so you set your ADF frequency via these knobs. The outer knob will select the two digits, the tens and the thousands, the hundreds and the thousands digit. You can see right there. This knob here will select the tens digit, and pushing it and then rotating it like this will select the ones digit. Now if you push freak, you can have a standby frequency. So if you're doing an approach and you need to switch ADFs pretty quickly, you can select freak, put the frequency you want, and then switch them out when you need to. FLT and ET are two timers. Flight time is a flight timer, and it shows the amount of time the gauge has been powered. See, if I turn it off and then back on, it goes back to 0. So that's a good way to keep track of your flight time from the time you turn avionics power on to the time you switch it off. ET is a constantly running elapsed timer, and it counts up in seconds. You can reset it with this switch here. Alright, so there you have a count up timer, which is useful. You have a second one over there on the clock. That's pretty much all there is to this gauge. Again, I don't know the different modes of ADF, A&T, and BFO. I don't know what any of that means. But I can use ADF, guys. IRL, in real life, the planes I trained in did not have ADF in them. I flew 4 different Skyhawks in my life, only one of which was a 172R, and that one was the only one that had ADF, and I've only flown that plane once. The other 3 were all 172 SPs, and they did not have ADF in them. They had G1000 avionics, so they just had the GPS and the 2 Nav Radios. Alright, let me switch this back off. Transponder, the fun thing. Normally, you would okay, in the old days, last year actually, you would turn this to standby, and it would be on standby when you were on the ground. Nowadays, they want you to have it in the on position when you're on the ground, at least in the United States. That changed recently. That's a recent change. So on position when you're on the ground, altitude when you're taking off or in the air. Standby just powers on the gauge, but it doesn't send any transmissions out. Test just runs the transponder through a self-test, and it all lights up just to make sure everything's good to go. On, that sets it to on mode. It's I don't think it, okay, maybe it is replying to radar. I don't really, not sure. It's just on and ready to go. Altitude is where it will reply to the radar with your current altitude to the radar selection. Now, ident, you shouldn't have to push ever in Flight Sim unless you set this gauge up for use with VATSIM like vPilot or something. Ident will flash, it will highlight your return on the controller's radar screen for about 30 seconds. You never push this unless the controller asks you to, because it gets confusing. Alright, these buttons down here let you set your squawk code. 1200 7000 7000 or 2700. Yeah, so basically that's how you set your transponder codes. If at any time you ever need to quickly go back to VFR, just click that button there. So again, let's set 2200, which is the normal IFR squawk code for VATSIM when there's no controller online. Or we can set 320076. Oh, hold on. It will keep the transponder code you punched in sort of locked in there for the time being. You can clear it if you made a mistake by going back 1 digit by pushing the clear button. Or if you push it again, it'll go back to the previous transponder code. So again, clear goes back 1 digit and lets you change it. If you push it all the way to the last digit and then push it again, it reverts back to the previous transponder code. And this button here will quickly get you back to the 1200 VFR squawk. Alright, we'll skip the autopilot for now. DME. Let me turn that back on. DME is the distance measuring equipment. Shows your nautical miles in slant range. Remember that, from the VOR. So if I had a VOR selected, in fact, let's do this. Let's get in the air, and then I'll go over the rest of it. So let's go take off. Alright, so I've commanded the autopilot to fly us on heading 090 up to 3,500 and catch it. So, DME. I've tuned the nearby Brunswick VOR, and we can see that we are 13 DME from it. Remember, there is a difference between DME and nautical miles from the station. We went over that during cruise, so I won't cover that again. But this is DME right here. We're 13.1 nautical miles away from the Brunswick VOR. KT, not 100% sure what that is. At first I thought it was ground speed, but I don't think it is. 3.4 is the... I'm guessing that is your distance or your time to the VOR in minutes, so 31 minutes out from the VOR. Which seems kind of long, granted we're that close. Okay, frequency lets you tune another VOR and see how far you are away from it. If I were to look at, see if there's another VOR nearby, I may be able to reach Savannah's VOR from here. 115.905. Alright, let's try it. 115.905. Yep. So that shows your distance from the VOR that you tune here. This is separate from the Comm Radios up there. So we're currently 53.4 DME from the Savannah VOR. And the next switch, and that's just ground speed and time from the Nav2 VOR. So that's Nav1, all the way over is Nav2, and that's just a sort of a third one that you can tune. Alright, one other thing I want to show. If I turn the aircraft sorta to the south. Remember we covered this switch earlier? Well, it's going to work now that we've tuned a nearby VOR. So, again, the same stuff works on COM 2 as well. Or Navcom 2. Alright, so aircraft's going to level off at 3,500. Alright, we have a second CDI OBS indication on this radio here. Remember, we got these two right here, but this mode selector lets us tune another one. Clicking it once has that, and we can set our OBS course via the knob here. This is the inner knob that does this, by the way. Outer knob lets you change the frequency. Push the inner knob in, lets you change the decimal part of the frequency. And I just forgot what the Brunswick VOR frequency was, since I just changed it like an idiot. No, not the intersection. The VOR. 109.8. Alrighty. So, we tuned this frequency here. Big knob will select the 109, and clicking the inner knob in will select the frequencies, 10s. Alright. So 109.8. Now, bringing this knob out will let us change the OBS. So we want to fly inbound on the whatever radial. So as you can see, we are on the 033 radial now. And we just drifted off of it. So we have a second CDI right here, and this works on this radio down here too. Flag just means it's not receiving a VOR station. Alright, now 2 indicates the bearing to the station. From indicates the bearing from the station. And ET is the estimated time to the station, I think. 16 minutes seems like an awful long time to go just 10 miles. Alright, so that covers that. And that's pretty much all the avionics. We've covered, yeah, basically everything. Everything else is more considered part of the aircraft, not the avionics. So we could go over the GPS, but the GPS is pretty lengthy. That's a tutorial for another day, I think. But just know that this GPS functions exactly like the default GPS, although the 295 will take a little getting used to. It is slightly different. Alrighty, hope you enjoyed this tutorial. We'll see you next time. This. Now, do you think you could navigate out here without the aid of your instruments, GPS and VORs? Look, you can't even see where the frickin' water is. I'm getting disoriented already.